많은 경우 예술은 우리가 세상이 그대로 멈춰섰으면 하는 순간에서 비롯한다. 너무도 아름답거나 진실되거나 장엄하거나 슬픈 나머지 삶을 계속하면서는 그냥 받아들일 수 없는 그런 순간 말이다. 예술은 평범한 것과 신비로움 양쪽 모두에 관한 것이어서 우리에게 뻔한 것들, 간과하고 지나간 것들을 돌아보도록 일깨워준다. 예술이 있는 곳에서 보낼 수 있었던 모든 시간에 고마운 마음이다. 나는 다시 이곳에 돌아올 것이다. 안녕하세요. 최성훈의 사고실험입니다. 오늘도 정말 특별한 손님을 모셨습니다. 작년 2024년 상반기 교보문고 종합 베스트셀러 1위를 차지했던 나는 메트로폴리탄 미술관의 경비원입니다 라는 에세이의 저자 패트릭 브링리 작가님을 모셨는데요. 얼마 전에 출연해 주셨던 이동진 평론가님께서도 2023년에 발간된 최고의 책 중 하나를 꼽아주셨었고, 저 역시도 그 책을 읽고 굉장히 깊은 감동을 받았습니다. 굉장히 아름다운 책이었고, 책을 읽어보지 않으신 분들을 위해서 설명을 조금 드리면, 작가님은 뉴요커라는 유명한 매거진에서 일을 하시다가 굉장히 아끼고 사랑하던 형이 이제 암으로 젊은 나이에 세상을 뜨시게 되면서 어떤 거대한 상실과 마주하게 되는데요. 그렇게 형님의 죽음으로 시작된 방황을 달랠 수 있는 곳을 찾고자 25살의 나이에 메트로폴리탄 미술관의 경비원직에 지원을 하시게 됩니다. 그곳에서 10년 동안 일하면서 자신이 본 예술과 또 예술을 보러 온 사람들에 대한 그런 인간에 대한 굉장히 따뜻한 여러 가지 시선이 담겨 있다고 말할 수 있겠습니다. 네, 그러면 소개하겠습니다. The author of All the Beauty in the World, Patrick Bringley.
Hello, thank you for having me.
First, thank you for writing this such a beautiful book, beautiful
well,
story.
Thank you. It's kind of you.
Yeah, and I guess that this book literally changed your life in a different way. So how do you feel? Like, how are you handling this time?
It's wild. I mean, here I am 7,000 miles away from New York City. And when I was writing the book, it's not as if I thought, oh, this is going to appeal to Korean audiences. But it has. Yesterday morning, I spent all morning in the National Museum of Korea. And
You saw that the Buddha, the room of contemplation, I guess?
That's an extraordinary room. They have this room with just these two bodhisattvas that are 1,300 years old. And it's really set up in a way that they sort of bring you through this dark passage into a room, and the floor is gently inclined toward these bodhisattvas, and you can walk all the way around it, and you're meant to spend a long time in there. And that's what I did. So I kind of felt like I was back being a guard. I leaned up against the wall, and I let those things kind of seep into me. And it was beautiful.
And you watched that if people kind of touched them or not.
Nobody touched. It would be very hard to touch them there because they're sort of up on a platform. But even so, they have a line that you're not meant to go past. But it seemed to me that people were taking the direction of being quiet in there and really, appreciate those treasures. And yeah, they're beautiful. I mean, they're kind of in this half lotus position where one leg is folded and the other leg is down toward the earth. And of course, they're bodhisattvas, so part of them is in spiritual land and part of them is on the earth like us. And there's kind of tension in their bodies and a little bit of a smile on their lips, and kind of everything about the works seems, it has some life in it. It has some rhythm in it, draws you to them and makes it feel like there's something in here I've got to respond to.
Through this answer, I can see how good you are at observation. Like, you remember all the surroundings, and while you say that, I can depict the picture of that room. So you're the best expert of museum I ever knew.
It is funny. I mean, yeah, you say I'm an expert. Like, in some ways, I'm not an expert at all. Like, I don't have degrees. There are many, of course, infinite more things I don't know than I do know. But it is true to some extent that if you want to know the person who has spent the most time with the works of art, it's some guard who's on his 49th year at the Louvre, because the guards are the ones that are out in the open with the stuff.
So when you enter the door of the museum, I have this kind of curiosity. Like, is there any difference that kind of other lens than I have? For example, when I just enter the museum, I go like a pointless tourist. Wow.
Well, I mean, I think the pointless tourist thing of just going, oh, wow, is a wonderful thing. I mean, that's the first thing I did. I guess the only thing that I do that's what I learned from my experience is I just really, really try to quiet down myself and my soul and get rid of the kind of little thoughts in my mind and just really try to have an experience, like a honest to God experience. Like if you're going to the top of a mountain or to the Grand Canyon, like these places that are meant to, seep into you and open you up and have a revelation or have an epiphany about something. Go into an art museum hoping that that'll happen to you, because this is some of the greatest stuff that's ever been made by human hands. And the masters who made this stuff, unbelievable amount of skill and care and discipline and whole cultures that push them to this level of excellence. And if you're standing in front of, 1,000-year-old hand scroll or something, give it feel amazed. I sometimes have used the analogy, imagine if you're like a big Beatles fan and you got to listen to the Beatles play just for you, in your apartment. That would be the most amazing thing. Well, if you're looking at that 1,000-year-old hand scroll, that's the real thing. That's the Beatles playing in your kitchen. It can't get better than that. It is right in front of you and is presenting itself to only you. And, just feel lucky.
Yeah, really seize the moment, own that piece, masterpiece, just for 1 minute at least. Feels like it's mine.
It's yours. It's yours. I mean, if you have your eyes on it, it is more yours than it is the academics and scholars who know things about it, because they're often in an office thinking about answering email or something. You're the one who's having the experience. And don't just take a picture of it and say oh, I'm going to look at that later, because you're not going to look at it later. And also, life is short and you have to appreciate these moments. Everything is fleeting. It only lasts for a few moments, any of this. So while you have those moments, make sure that you're savoring it, because, what else are we doing?
So let's back to your book. I gave my audience a brief explanation about your background before you work at Met. So can you give us an explanation about that decision that you quit your job, just run away from the world and get into the most beautiful and most silent place in the world?
Sure. Sometimes when you're just going about your day and doing normal life, nothing feels that substantial. Sometimes it just feels like you're kind of going through motions. And then sometimes enormous things happen in life that kind of make you stop and go whoa, this is on a different order. That happened to me in that my brother got sick. He was an extraordinary man. He was a very brilliant, but also just the most sort of unassuming, just kind of generous, normal guy, funny, loved baseball, loved, hanging out. Then all of a sudden he was just up against unbelievable trials, surgery after surgery and chemotherapy and radiation. And he handled all of that with this extraordinary grace. I sometimes thought God, I get more annoyed about getting a cold than this guy with cancer is just, he just rose to the occasion, and it felt so real and it felt so substantial and so sad and so beautiful and so everything. And then when he, his cancer was very sick, so he died, I didn't want to then just rush back to life again and be okay, well, what do I do now? I just go back and answer emails again and whatever. I wanted to do something that felt just kind of honest and straightforward, not any nonsense. I had very sort of low capacity for things that felt like fake or brown nosing or corporate ladder climbing or whatever. I instead took a job that seemed very straightforward. It's what is it you do? I go to an art museum and I make sure people don't touch the pictures, and otherwise I think my thoughts.
And you were very young when you started working at Met, because even though I know nothing about life of the guard and the ecosystem of the museum, but yeah, I can be sure 25 years old guard is kind of the youngest person. Then what kind of people are there as your colleague? It's really diverse, I guess.
It's incredibly diverse. I mean, New York is just such a diverse place.
Yeah.
Almost half of New York is immigrant. And I would guess that the guards are even maybe a little more than half are immigrants. So they're from every country and every continent, all different ages, all different kind of interests and sort of styles of thinking and styles of being. And it makes it a really cool workplace, because I think, a lot of people work jobs where your colleagues are going to have similar similar interests to you. That's why you're all in the same job. Whereas a job like a guard at the Met is sort of unique in that, you know, I'm 25 years old at the time from Chicago, and this guy over here is 64 years old and from Guyana. He and I are just exactly the same position, exactly the same rank. So someone who can be 25 and someone who can be 62 can then go out and get a beer together. You know, it's not like that always happens, but for whatever reason, I found myself friends with a lot of older people.
Yeah, isn't it kind of interesting? I mean, as a tourist, in my lens, everyone looked the same. I'm sorry, but everyone wearing that uniform and do the same job. But as you mentioned, the diversity between them is even more diverse than that I experienced in Korea right now. So people used to forget about that, the real life behind the uniform, kind of that.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's important in all aspects of life. I mean, it's very easy to forget that people are people because you're, you know, on the phone with tech support or something and the guy is annoying you because he can't solve your problem or something. But for all you know, that guy might be a break dancer who has his niece loves him more than anything and he's the most important person in her life and he might be a saint, that guy. You know, you just have no idea. People who work all different jobs and all different walks of life have all different skills and all different interests.
All different stories.
All different stories. And it's really foolish to look at people who are wearing a certain uniform and be like, oh, those are all custodians. The fact that they're a custodian, that tells you nothing about who they are. Like, nothing.
And it's kind of a small question, but when I read the book, I can feel that you are kind of a great guard or decent guard. So what are the qualities or capabilities to be an excellent guard?
Sure. I mean, well, you need to be okay with being still and quiet and having your head up and be attentive, you know? But yeah, there's also just kind of skills you can have, like people skills. I mean, of course, you want to be very inviting to people who want to ask you questions and give them directions and tell them about the works of art if they are puzzled about, you know, where they are and what this art is. And then you need people skills too, because things are going to go wrong and you want to de-escalate. You know, if somebody's being a knucklehead or being to guide them without it becoming an issue. So I think that people who are very good guards are people who would succeed in all sorts of fields because they've got good people skills. They can read people and they can, you know, makes people like them.
Yeah, and there are famous questions the tourists ask to the guard. Like the one in the book is, oh, where is Mona Lisa? Yeah, in the Met. And is there any other episode about?
Well, it's always funny to me that, you know, people who don't know anything about art, which I never judge those people because I don't know anything about tons of things, you know, I don't know anything about cars, you know, and how engines work or something. But people who don't know anything about art, it's funny, they'll go into the Met just because it's, you know, big and famous. And there are some people who want to know where the Mona Lisa is, assume that the Met is the Art Hall of Fame and has everything they've ever heard of. But then there are other people who are the opposite and they look at things and they can't believe if anything's real. That's the other classic question. They'll point at a Picasso painting and they'll say, that's not real. And I'll say, yeah, it's real. And they'll go, that one, that's real, but there's not even glass on it. And I'll go, yeah, that's why I'm here. Yeah, there's not glass on it, but it's real, you know? And they can't believe that because they've never really thought about it. They think that little old them doesn't have access to this stuff. They think that this is rich people stuff that, you know, is locked away in a vault somewhere. Then you can see it dawn on them that not only is that a Picasso, that thing down the hall that looks like an ancient Egyptian temple, that's an ancient Egyptian temple. That's real.
It's a funny episode and it's a cute episode, but it's not really just funny and cute because we all have the first time that we enter the door of museum. And as you mentioned, like if people are not really familiar with that kind of experience, they can assume that arts belong to the rich people and people like me have no access to the real pieces. Yeah, so it's...
I would tell them that, you know, they should be proud. Like the one question that you get is people ask you, you know, how much is that worth? And I would always tell them that, well, you can't really say because the whole reason why when rich people buy art in the private art market that it commands such crazy prices is because most of the really good stuff belongs to us. It belongs to the public in these great public collections. And we should feel proud of that the rich people are really buying the table scraps, you know? Like the Leonardo da Vinci that's sold to the Saudis for $500 million or something. The reason is because the Mona Lisa is in the Louvre. It belongs to the people of France. So I just think that's cool.
Yeah. When I read your book, I first realized that there are 3 categories of time flowing on the corridor of the museum, which is, one is the time of that art piece, which endures like hundreds of thousands of years. The second is our time, tourist time, like 1 minute at one piece or 10 seconds at one piece. And there are another time, the time of guard, 8 hours or 12 hours a day. And it really mediates my time and artwork's time. So yeah, it's really a nice finding. Thank you for that.
Oh, no, that's interesting. Yeah, I haven't thought about it quite like that. Yeah, we sort of take their minutes and stretch it into hours and days and career long. That, of course, is a different scale of time to the works of art. But there's all different times in there because there's also the time that the artist took to make that. There's the time of the whole civilization, how it funneled into this one work of art by having all these different styles and stuff and skills build to that. If you're looking at a photograph that's from 1910, you're like, wow, that's old. A photograph from 1910, that's 100-something years old. But that is nothing compared to, you know, an ancient Greek statue. But the ancient Greek statue is nothing compared to, you know, the marble that it was made from, which was made before the dinosaurs, you know? So there's everything that has its own time scale.
Yeah, so there are countless layers of time. The time of the marble, the time of the statue, the time of the artist, the time of the Greek, the time of the Met, and the time of that room. And it really kind of makes my art seeing more kind of prosperous. It's more complicated and more beautiful.
Oh, I'm so glad. I'm so glad. I mean, I think the whole thing about seeing that it's different than just looking. You know, if you look at a cup, this image imprints on my retina and that I can kind of see its dimensions and the light falling on it and things. But like really seeing something, you're also bringing yourself to it. Because it's having some effect on you or not. And there are cultural associations with it. You know, maybe it's a beautiful teacup that has to do with some ceremony and that has its own feeling to it. So all of a sudden, not only are you seeing a teacup, but it's somehow attached to the human being who made that teacup. And all of that takes time to return to that phrase.
So in your book, you kind of seem to suggest people to find their own way of seeing art. Then what I felt when I read your book is, oh, this guy seemed to enjoy imagining the exact time and the place and the perspective of that artist when he or she really made that piece. Am I correct?
Oh, yeah. No, that's fun to do because one thing that makes you realize is it makes some of this art relatable because all of us know what it is to work hard at something or maybe try to make it great. That doesn't have to be a work of art. It can be, you know, just a meal that you made for your wife or something. And you know that it's hard to do anything really good, you know, and it's a struggle and it's not just like nice. When you study artists and their lives, you realize that even like Michelangelo, he didn't think of himself as Michelangelo. You know, he was constantly struggling and he thought that he was, you know, no good at painting and he was constantly slogged through the Sistine Chapel ceiling and he was just so glad that people liked it okay so he could move on to something else.
Yeah, and there's a kind of complaint that he wrote to his father that the world doesn't support art well, but even though he lived in a Renaissance.
I know, I love that. I think it's so perfect that every time artists always think that they are living in a crappy age for art and that some other age was much, much better and much more fertile. But I think that's probably never true. It's probably every era is awful and great, you know? But yeah, that's all to say. If you imagine the artists and why they made that stuff and how they made that stuff, it does give it dimension because most of these artists did not think that they were just making some painting for people to look at in an art museum in Manhattan. They thought that they were making a work of art that would be in a temple or
king to
yes, that would be used for some reason. In some ways, that's truer to the work of art than studying them the way that a scholar or sort of a curator might. Actually, it's the common person that wanders into museum that's more like what they intended. Because if it's some altarpiece, it was meant to just kind of fill you with awe and wonder, not to make you think, oh, that was made in the Baroque era, but it's not quite as fine an example as the one that they have, in Berlin. They didn't think any of those thoughts would pass through our head.
So my favorite chapter is the last one, the chapter about you say bye to the Met. When I read this, I really think that if I can have the last day like this, that would be a blessing. And before the last day at the Met, you make a list to find out which is the favorite art piece. And you chose Crucifixion, the painting of the Jesus by Fra Angelico.
Yes.
Can you tell me more about the procedure, how you erase some and get to the last painting, that Fra Angelico's painting?
Yeah, it's interesting. It almost relates to what we were saying before about sometimes life is about exploring and then sometimes it's about paring down and sort of simplifying. I think that you probably want to do both, a place as big as the Met. So in some ways you want to explore and keep an open mind. And then sometimes you want to say, I actually want to shrink this place down to the 10 things I like the best, the 5 things I like the best, the one thing. It might change on different days, but there's just something that is very sort of essential about this beautiful Fra Angelico picture. The Crucifixion, painted about the year 1400. It's a very small panel. It's made of tempera paint, so egg yolk base. So it's very fragile and it's very kind of, naked. It's made of these pigments that are just ground up earth and stones and vegetable matter. Those materials have created all these distinct human beings at the base of the cross that all have their own kind of personality. And some of them are looking up, interested at what's happening, and some of them are a little bored. Some of them are sorrowful, and other ones have the sense that, life goes on even despite this. And painting of Christ himself is so beautiful. It's just very kind of simple and devastating. This is this young man who's dead up there. And then even more devastating, in the bottom register of the picture, you've got Mary and John the Evangelist and Mary Magdalene are sort of attending to her with just great compassion sort of in their hearts. And I think if you look at that picture in total, it just seems to have all these different aspects of what it means to be human and what goes on in this world. It's very beautifully painted. It's both very sad and very beautiful. It has a sort of resonance with me because my mom loved old master paintings, and it had a similarity to what we went through with my brother in some ways. So it's not that I think it's the greatest painting in the world. I mean, as far as Fra Angelico's go, it's a rather minor painting. He was quite young, but it means a great deal to me. And one thing I don't have in the book is that after the book came out, Michael Gallagher, who was the paintings conservator at the Met, was reading my book, and he said that he just couldn't believe when he got to that in the final chapter, because he said, you got to come see this. This is on my easel. And he was cleaning it. So I got to go in the paintings conservation studio. I got to see it out of its frame, and he had removed all past restorations made through the centuries. And you could actually see wormholes in this panel, areas where worms had bitten through this poplar panel. So it seemed even more naked and even more tender, and that even adds to it for me.
Yeah, that's a really special experience. You know what? Like, why your answer is so beautiful? Because it doesn't belong to you. It belongs to Matt. But when I hear what you said, I felt that it belongs to you. It's yours.
Why not? Why not? I had a colleague, I call him Troy in the book. He's this very dignified older gentleman. And I once asked him, why are you a guard here? Like, why did you choose this job? And he said, well, the only thing I've ever wanted to be is an independently wealthy patron of the arts. And this comes closest. And in a sense, we don't own the art, but in another sense, we're the ones who spend all the time with it. So, sure. Because all we only have in this life, we're not taking anything with us. All we have is experiences, you don't really own anything. You just have these experiences with things that you run into, and, none of it is permanent. So, I do think that in a way, Fra Angelico picture belongs to the people who spend the most, authentic time with it. That could be anybody. It could be you.
Did you say bye? Any words to them?
Oh, I don't know. I'm not sure. I do kind of say in my head sometimes, but I always knew that I would be returning to these things
Yeah.
because, the Met's still there. It's not going away. I give private tours there, but I also just go to see old friends in a way. So, yeah, I didn't feel like I was saying any sort of final goodbye. I mean, I think the only thing that I've said a final goodbye to is that sort of rhythm of being a guard and that simplicity and that kind of community. I still see the individual people, but I'm not embedded in those individual people. So that's the only thing I truly miss. I don't miss the art because I can still see it.
At the last part of the book, you wrote that all thing about this book is for Tom, written for Tom, and it gave me kind of feeling that I know Tom too. Really, I mean it. You've never imagined that your personal grief expands to the world, and a 30-year-old guy in Korea might slip his tears after
Oh.
writing this book. And not only me, but a lot of people in the world, we share some memory of Tom. So
Oh, that's so sweet. That's so sweet. No, that makes me very happy, of course, because that's the thing, like people, we're all mortal and there's a part of us that is going to disappear, but then also our lives infect all other people's lives, and what we sort of put out into the world continues to exist in some form, to the extent that I was able to channel the kind of aspects of Tom that he impressed into me. And I've been very happy to hear from people who knew him that, they felt like they was, back in his company. Like a portrait, for instance, in an art museum can give you a sense of that person, and you just feel like their personality sort of emanates from them. So I just tried to very sort of lightly kind of sketch that character. So I don't think it's like not a full painted portrait, but it's a pencil sketch.
Yeah.
But I'm glad that, even a pencil sketch in art sometimes can shoot something toward us. So I'm happy to hear that, at least for you, that it worked.
yeah, but I knew that it worked to a lot of people in Korea.
Okay.
This might be the final question, but this book starts with the tragedy, like your loss of Tom, but there's more in this book, like not only getting over the pain and loss, but becoming friends with your colleagues, and you met your wife, Tara, and new kids, Oliver and Louis. Even though in the grief, we saw some light, there's always, I can sense the hope. I just want to know, maybe 25 years old, Patrick Bringley, have not enough room for hope at the time, but after 10 years, that guy have some room of hope in his mind. So who taught you that? The artist did, or Tara and Oliver and Louis did?
Yes, well, that's very kind. I mean, I always think that these things, sort of beauty and sorrow, that they're connected. And the main way that they're connected is mortality. The fact that our lives are brief is what gives them beauty in a way. Because if they were just endless, it wouldn't be a story anymore, And the fact that our lives are stories is very beautiful, and it's also hard, and it involves aging and losing our hair and everything, but it also, you gain things at the same time as you're losing, and the brevity of it is, not to get too philosophical, but like, a cherry blossom or something. Like the fact that it's only around a little bit is what gives it its beauty, and then it's gone, and then you wait the next year. So I think that I always knew that those things were paired. So it's not like I was just horribly in a terrible depression when I entered the Met, because spending time with my brother in the hospital room was also a very beautiful experience that was filled, that I was very grateful for. It wasn't just an awful experience at all. I wish it had ended very differently, but it's not like I was bitter about it. But it is true, though, that, my wife and my kids and my friends and all did give me, I guess, a sense that ordinary, everyday life can also be very, very worthwhile. Because I think in the book, in the beginning, I'm really down on sort of ordinary, everyday life. I just want to be in some beautiful place. But then I started having conversations with visitors, even though they're not very deep. They're not like this conversation, but they're just like, hey, is there a good restaurant around here? Like, you know what? There's not really good around in the Lower East Side. You want to go somewhere else? Here, let me tell you. Okay, thanks a lot, man. You're really nice. And like, it just feels nice. You're a part of New York, and you're sort of a part of everyday life. Then from there, I think I moved to making lasting friendships with my fellow guards, and all of that sort of put me back into rhythm. You know, I think in some sense, grief is sort of a loss of rhythm. You sort of step aside from the way that reality operates for everybody else, and reality is not operating that way for you. So it can kind of estrange you from everyone else. But, you know, at some point you are going to have to get back in rhythm. And I was happy to have people who taught me how to be a grown up in a way. But by the end of the book, you know, I want to get out there in the world again and get my hands dirty and sort of deal with the annoying hard work it takes to build anything, because I kind of have to. I've got kids now. And when you've got kids, you gotta be building things, you know, you gotta get their life in order. And that involves a lot of little details and a little annoying things. But it also has meaning. You know, it has to have meaning because that's what you're spending your time on. And it has beauty, and it has to have beauty because, you know, it's most of what our life is. So if you decided that just work and getting through the day and going to the grocery store and stuff has no beauty at all, then it would be a desolate existence. You have to find it. So I think I did learn to find, and that's the English title, All the Beauty in the World, sort of what it's thinking about. You know, in one way, it is about the Met that tries to capture all the different cultures of the world and all their beautiful things, you know, put them under one roof. But then also, you know, there's much more beauty than just that. There's much more beauty than just beautiful objects, you know?
Yeah. Also people there.
Also people there. And then also, you know, the world outside those doors, that in some ways the Met, the world in the doors, is paying tribute to the world, the bigger world outside its doors. So I don't know. None of it's simple.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for your time and your sincere, you know, answers.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It was a great conversation. Thanks.
You may, you know, leave your place, but I just want to read in voice the last part of your book.
Oh, in English or Korean?
In Korean, because you may not understand what I'm saying, but this means something to me.
Okay, sure.
많은 경우 예술은 우리가 세상이 그대로 멈춰섰으면 하는 순간에서 비롯한다. 너무도 아름답거나 진실되거나 장엄하거나 슬픈 나머지 삶을 계속하면서는 그냥 받아들일 수 없는 그런 순간 말이다. 예술가들은 그 덧없는 순간들을 기록해서 시간이 멈춘 것처럼 보이도록 한다. 그들은 우리로 하여금 어떤 것들은 덧없이 흘러가 버리지 않고 세대를 거듭하도록 계속 아름답고 진실되고 장엄하고 슬프고 기쁜 것으로 남아있을 수 있다고 믿게 해준다. 그리고 이곳 매트에 유화 물감으로 그려지고 대리석에 새겨지고 퀼트로 바느질된 그 증거물들이 있다. 세상이 이토록 형형색색으로 화려하고 충만하며 그런 세상이 존재하지 않는 것이 아니라 존재하며 사람들이 아름다운 것들을 정성을 다해 만들려는 본성을 가지고 태어났다는 사실이 신비롭다. 예술은 평범한 것과 신비로움 양쪽 모두에 관한 것이어서 우리에게 뻔한 것들, 간과하고 지나간 것들을 돌아보도록 일깨워준다. 예술이 있는 곳에서 보낼 수 있었던 모든 시간에 고마운 마음이다. 나는 다시 이곳에 돌아올 것이다. 10년 전 배치된 구역에 처음 섰을 때 내가 이해하지 못했던 것들이 있었다. 때때로 삶은 단순함과 정적만으로 이루어져 있을 때도 있다. 빛을 발하는 예술품들 사이에서 방심하지 않고 모든 것을 살피는 경비원의 삶처럼 말이다. 그러나 삶은 군말 없이 살아가면서 고군분투하고 성장하고 새로운 것을 창조해내는 것이기도 하다. 5시 30분이 되자 나는 클립으로 부착하는 해진 넥타이를 떼고서 중앙 계단을 뛰어내려간다.